What would you do if 3 fake HOA officers demanded to inspect your child in a valley with no HOA? This is the story of the morning 3 strangers showed up at my ranch gate, calling themselves HOA officers and demanding to inspect my child. Problem was, our valley doesn't have an HOA. When I followed the trail, it led to someone far worse, a developer who thought threatening my daughter would break the whole valley. The first thing I heard that morning wasn't the wind in the cottonwoods or the low mumble of the creek below the dam. It was the sound of my front gate getting hammered like somebody wanted to rip it off the posts. Bang! 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 The echo rolled up the dirt lane and through the open kitchen window, rattling the coffee mug in my hand. I'd lived in this valley long enough to know the difference between a neighbor's knock and trouble. That was trouble. I set the mug down and listened. The goats went quiet in the pen. The old dog, Rusty, let out a low growl from under the table, hackles already up. Outside, another round came, 3 sharp blows against the heavy planks of my wooden ranch gate. Bang! 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 Daddy? A small voice came from the hallway. I turned. My daughter, Emma, stood there in her dinosaur pajamas, hair sticking up in every direction, rubbing sleep out of her eyes. 8 years old, too small for the world I knew all too well. Back to your room, kiddo, I said, softer than I felt. Close the door. I'll see who it is. Her eyes flicked toward the sound at the gate, then back to me. She knew that look on my face. I tried to smile anyway. It's okay, I lied. Probably someone lost. She nodded, but only because she trusted me, not because she believed it. She disappeared down the hallway, small feet padding on the wood, door clicking shut a second later. I waited until I heard the lock. Only then did I let my shoulders square up. The kitchen smelled like coffee and bacon grease. Outside smelled like dust and cold creek water. I stepped onto the back porch, the slats creaking under my boots, and the chill grabbed me right through my flannel. The sun had just cleared the ridge, turning the frost on the pasture into a sheet of gold. My pickup sat by the barn, still dusted white from last night's cold. Beyond it, the dam cut across the narrow throat of the valley, a low spine of earth and stone I'd built with my own hands. The gate shook again. "Mr. Remy, open up!" a voice shouted. "HOA enforcement. We need to speak with you regarding compliance." HOA. The word sounded wrong in that air. Redwater Valley doesn't have a homeowners association. That was the reason I bought this place. No board meetings, no paint color approvals, no letters about grass height. Just land, water, and sky. I walked down the porch steps, boots crunching on the thin layer of frozen dirt. Rusty trailed behind me, hackles still raised, gaze fixed on the gate that guarded the end of my lane. The gate was simple but solid. Heavy timber between 2 upright posts, cross-braced, hung from iron hinges I'd salvaged from an old feed mill. On the front, facing the road, a metal sign read, "No trespassing private ranch, no HOA, ever." It had started as a joke. Over the years, it turned into policy. As I got closer, the men on the other side came into focus between the slats. There were 3 of them. The one doing the pounding stood dead center, knuckles white on the wood. He wore a navy windbreaker with big white letters that said HOA enforcement across the back. Like a movie costume someone hadn't bothered to age properly. The jacket was too new, too stiff. His dress shoes were covered in dust they weren't used to. On his left was a taller man with a buzz cut and a neck like a tree stump. The kind of build you get from pushing weights and not much else. On the right, a younger guy, thin, jittery, eyes darting from fence line to barn to house like he expected something to leap out of the sagebrush. Behind them, idling at the shoulder of the county road, sat a black SUV. Tinted windows, chrome grille, no ranch dust on the tires yet. The license plate caught my eye. Nevada. We're a long way from Nevada. I stopped a few yards from the gate. Rusty moved up beside me, lips pulled back in a silent warning. The center man noticed and took half a step back, then seemed to remember he was supposed to look official and planted his feet again. "Morning," I said. My voice carried easy in the cold air. "You boys lost?" "Mr. Jake Remy?" he asked, ignoring my question. "Depends who's asking." He put on a professional smile that never reached his eyes and lifted a folder in his hand, pinched between two fingers like a badge. Up close, I could see the cheap plastic cover, the corner of a stapled packet sticking out, and the faintest tremor in his wrist. "Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association," he said. "We're here on an urgent compliance matter. Recent updates to the juvenile homeowner regulations require us to inspect the welfare conditions of any minor residents on properties flagged as non-compliant." I let the words hang there for a moment, watching the condensation of his breath fog through the gate slats. Somewhere down by the spillway, a crow called once and then shut up, like even it wanted to hear how this would play out. "That's a lot of syllables for a Tuesday morning," I answered. "Let me save you some time. There is no HOA in this valley. Not now, not ever. You're at the wrong gate." The tall one shifted his weight, gravel crunching under his dress shoes. The skinny kid checked something on his phone, thumb moving fast, then angled it toward the house like he was lining up a shot. The leader didn't blink. "Mr. Remy, the rules have recently been updated," he said, sharper this time. "Your property was incorporated into Silver Creek Estates under the latest filing. That includes your... what is it?" He glanced at his folder. "Impoundment structure and minor water features." He meant my dam, my lake. "New bylaws," he went on. "Section 12C outlines juvenile homeowner regulations. We have received reports that there is an 8-year-old girl residing here. We are required to verify that her living environment meets community standards." My jaw tightened. The cold didn't feel so cold anymore. "You've been on my land for exactly 0 minutes," I said, "and you're already talking about my kid." "Sir," he started, and this time there was a hint of impatience under the fake professionalism. "Non-cooperation will result in fines, liens, and possible involvement of child services. We are authorized under the association charter to inspect the premises and ensure the safety of minor occupants. This is standard procedure." I took another slow step toward the gate until I was close enough to see the stubble on his chin and the faint scar on his cheek that looked like it might have come from a bar fight, not a board meeting. The HOA enforcement letters on his jacket were cracked around the edges, like they'd been ironed on last night. "Let me help you out," I said quietly. "There is no association charter that covers my land. My deed predates your subdivision by about 30 years. My dam was permitted by the state long before some developer decided to name this valley after his golf swing. You boys aren't HOA, and you sure as hell don't have any authority over my daughter." The younger one swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing. The tall one smirked, just barely, like he enjoyed the tension. The leader's eyes went flat, the fake smile vanishing like someone flipped a switch. He slipped the folder through the slats, shoving a stack of papers toward me. They scraped against the rough wood on the way in. "Read the notice," he said. "You'll see we have full legal standing. Your refusal to comply will be documented. We suggest you cooperate, Mr. Remy. It will go easier on your little girl." Rusty growled, a low rumble that came from somewhere deep in his chest. My hand found the top of his head automatically, fingers curling in his fur, more to keep myself from doing something stupid than to calm the dog. I didn't take the papers, not yet. Instead, I let my eyes drift past the men to the SUV again. The engine was still running, no ranch stickers on the bumper, tires too clean. "Plate from Nevada," No HOA in Redwater Valley, but a black truck from a different state shows up with 3 strangers and a fresh printed story about new rules. I'd seen this pattern before. Different uniforms, different language, same eyes. The kind of men who hide behind authority they don't deserve, betting you won't know the difference. I finally reached out and took the folder, more to see what game they were playing than anything else. The paper was thick, fancy stock, logo at the top, a swooping line drawing of mountains and a lake, Silver Creek Estates HOA, in elegant script. The text was dense with legal jargon, numbered sections and subsections, fines, penalties, all the usual intimidation tricks. Down at the bottom, just above the signature line, was an address for correspondence. A P.O. box in Las Vegas. Not Redwater. Not even Montana. My thumb rested over the box number. "Like I said," I murmured, looking up at the man in the windbreaker. "You boys are a long way from home." His jaw flexed. Behind him, the tall one checked the road, scanning up and down the empty ribbon of gravel like he expected a patrol car to roll up any second. The skinny kid raised his phone again, this time angling it past me toward the front porch, where Emma's little pink boots sat by the door. "We'll need to come inside now," the leader said. "Verify sleeping arrangements, safety of water features, firearms storage, hazardous equipment. With a minor present, that's non-negotiable." Inside the house, a floorboard creaked, the sound of a small weight shifting. Even from here, I could picture Emma peeking through her bedroom curtain, watching the men at the gate, trusting that her dad had it under control. I'd been a lot of things in my life. Sailor, SEAL, engineer, dam builder. I'd walked into compounds in countries most people couldn't spell. I'd seen men with real authority abuse it, and men with no authority pretend they had some. But I'd never seen anyone walk up to my gate and use my daughter as leverage. "I'll tell you what's non-negotiable," I said, voice low and even. "You're not stepping foot on my land. Not with that story. Not with that plate. Not with those jackets." "Then you're leaving us no choice," he snapped. "We document your refusal and we escalate. You'll hear from child services, from county code enforcement, from the bank that holds your mortgage. That little dam you're so proud of might not look so legal when the right people start asking questions. You really want to risk that? For what? Stubbornness?" The wind shifted, carrying the sharp smell of exhaust from the SUV mixed with the clean, cold scent of the creek behind me. A crow flapped from one fence post to another, restless. For a long second, nobody spoke, just the idle of the engine, the faint ticking of a cooling exhaust pipe, Rusty's breathing, my own heartbeat steady in my ears. They thought they were just pushing another country fool who didn't know paper from power. They didn't know about the blueprints rolled up in my basement. They didn't know about the years I'd spent studying flow rates, water rights, and every inch of land in this valley before I ever drove a fence post. They didn't know who I used to be before I traded sand and gunpowder for dirt and cedar. "Last time," the leader said, softer now, like he was tired of playing polite. "Open the gate and let us in to see the girl, or we start treating this as non-compliance and endangerment." I looked at him through the spaces between the boards, at the Nevada plate, at the cheap jacket with big letters that didn't mean a damn thing out here. My hand tightened on the folder until the paper creased, because one question had started to burn hotter than all the rest, right in the middle of my chest. If this was just a scam for fines, why were fake HOA officers so interested in my child? I didn't give the men another word. I turned, whistled for Rusty, and walked back toward the house, letting the cold morning swallow the rest of the conversation. Their voices followed me, sharp, angry, trying to claw their way through the gate slats, but I shut the door before any of it could land. The latch clicked. The house became quiet again, except for the steady hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of wood as it warmed in the sunlight. Emma's door was still closed. Good. I set the folder on the kitchen table, the papers inside fanning open just enough for the fake HOA seal to glint under the overhead light. I stared at it for a long moment, piecing together the pieces that didn't fit. Nevada plate. Fresh printed jackets. New website. Juvenile homeowner regulations. Nothing about it belonged to this valley. The kettle clicked off behind me, steam curling around the spout like a ghost. I poured myself a new cup of coffee, hands steadier than my thoughts, and stepped out onto the back porch again. From here, the land stretched out in all the ways I loved. The golden pasture dipping toward the creek, the line of cottonwoods swaying in the breeze, the dam I'd rebuilt after the old one washed out years ago. A place where a man could raise a daughter in peace. At least that's what I believed until last week. It had started small. A letter in the mailbox, thicker than a bill, folded neat. I'd tossed it on the counter, figuring it was another offer from someone wanting to buy a slice of my land. The kind of thing that happened whenever a developer's drone footage made the rounds online. Land like this, with water and pasture, had value beyond price these days. But that night, my neighbor Ernest had knocked on my door. 68 years old, denim overalls, wide hat, a man carved out of the same soil he worked for 50 years. He stood there holding the same envelope I'd ignored. "You get one of these, Jake?" he'd asked, shaking the letter like it bit him. "Probably," I said. "Haven't looked yet." "Read it." His voice had none of its usual slow humor. That got my attention. We opened the envelopes at the same time, standing under the porch light, with moths flicking around the bulb. Inside were identical violation notices, same header, same logo, same sharp legal tone. Mine accused me of maintaining an unsecured water hazard. Ernest's said his goats were visible from the road in ways that diminish community aesthetics. Community aesthetics. I'd laughed then, thinking it had to be a joke. Ernest hadn't laughed. "They fined me $300, he muttered, smoothing the paper. "Due in 10 days. "For goats?" I asked. "For goats," he said, spitting in the dirt. We'd both gone quiet. The letters looked official, but there were tells. Font too modern, grammar too clean, wording too vague. And most obvious of all, our valley had no HOA, never had. Folks here wouldn't allow it, even if someone tried. The only people who even talked about forming one were the out-of-state buyers who came in once a summer, then disappeared until the next. But they never stuck their noses in local business. The next morning, more neighbors came knocking. The Hendersons with their trampoline. The Hughes couple with the windmill. Even old man Watanabe, who kept to himself, had a citation for unauthorized ornamental water features tied to his koi pond. The fines ranged from $150 to $500, and every letter carried the same signature. Silver Creek Estates, Homeowners Association Chairman, Civic Standards Division. But nobody in the valley had ever heard of Silver Creek Estates. We talked about it over coffee at the old feed store, a huddle of worry and confusion. Some folks were ready to pay the fines just to avoid trouble. Others wanted to call the sheriff. I suggested waiting until we had more information, though inside I knew something wasn't right. When I got home that day, I pulled up the HOA website listed in the letter. The page looked neat and professional, but too neat. No history section, no contact photos. The hosting domain had been created just 2 weeks earlier. The board minutes were PDFs with metadata that didn't match the supposed publication dates. The contact phone number? Nevada. And the address listed on the letters? A shipping center in Las Vegas. Suite 1932. Probably just a rented mailbox. But it hadn't felt dangerous. Just lazy criminal work. Someone with a printer and too much time. Until today. A cold gust whipped across the porch, rattling the screen door. I took a slow breath, letting the steam from my coffee brush against my face. Behind me, the house settled, Emma moving on the second floor, maybe peeking out her window to see if the men were still here. I leaned against the railing and let my eyes drift to the front gate again. The SUV was still there, purring like a predator in tall grass. The men stood beside it now, talking in low, clipped voices. One pointed toward the house, another checked the road. This ain't about goats or windmills, I muttered to myself. Last week had been warnings. This morning was escalation. They weren't looking to collect fines. They weren't trying to scare old ranch hands into paying out of fear of paperwork. They had asked for Emma by name. And that, more than the letters, more than the fake bylaws, was the brightest red flag I'd seen since retiring from the Navy. I set the coffee down and strode back inside, locking the door behind me. Emma's boots were still by the entry mat, toes dusted with dried mud from her creek adventures. Her backpack sat slumped against the wall, patches sewn on crooked where she'd helped me attach them. I went to her room. She was sitting on her bed, hugging her stuffed triceratops, eyes wide and waiting. "They're gone," I lied gently. She didn't ask questions. She trusted me enough not to. I brushed her, hair back from her forehead, and smiled until she relaxed. "We'll have breakfast soon," I said. "You stay in here for a bit." "Okay," she whispered. I closed the door softly, then returned to the kitchen table. The letters, the Nevada plate, the men at the gate. All of it arranged itself into a pattern I didn't like. Fake HOA scams usually aim for easy targets, quick fines, empty threats. They don't show up in person with 3 men and a vehicle from out of state. They don't talk about children. They don't push their way onto private ranch property knowing the sheriff is one call away. Unless they needed something more than money. I picked up the stack of HOA papers again. Flecks of dust had settled on the top sheet from when the wind blew through the porch door. I brushed them off and read the letter one more time, looking for the line that had bothered me. There it was. Failure to comply with juvenile safety inspections may result in intervention from County Child Services. Child Services. They were spoofing government authority. That was new. That was dangerous. That was the kind of pressure used when someone wanted land fast, before anyone could object. A car door slammed outside. I stood still, breath held, listening. The SUV backed up, gravel popping under its tires, then rolled away down the county road. I watched it from the window until the dust cloud faded behind the ridge. Only then did the knot in my chest loosen, just a fraction. I gathered the letters, mine, Ernest's, everyone's, and slid them into a folder. They weren't just scams anymore. They were evidence. And if these men weren't after fines, then what exactly were they after? The question followed me around the kitchen, but like a shadow that had grown teeth. I stood there a moment longer, listening to the quiet house, the ticking clock, the hum of the heater kicking on. Outside, the valley was waking up, wind brushing through dry grass, a cow bellowing near the fence line, the distant rumble of a tractor from the brewer place. Normal sounds. Good sounds. But nothing felt normal anymore. Rusty paced by the back door, nails clicking on the wood floor, glancing at me as if waiting for instructions. His instincts were sharper than mine sometimes. A dog knows when the ranch is off balance. "All right, boy," I murmured. "Let's get to work." I made sure Emma was still in her room, door cracked, her humming drifting out as she played with her rocks. At least she'd relaxed. Kids bounce back faster than adults. I whispered through the door that I'd be downstairs working and that she should stay put unless she heard me call. She nodded, though her eyes searched mine like she sensed the storm building. I kissed her forehead and headed to the mudroom. Past the coats, the boots, and the shelves of tools, I pressed the back edge of a faded John Deere poster. Hidden magnets clicked softly, and the panel swung open to reveal a narrow staircase descending beneath the ranch. The air grew cooler as I walked down, the scents changing from cedar and cooked breakfast to concrete, metal, and old paper. A faint hum filled the room as the lights flickered on. My war room, built when I retired from the Navy SEALs and realized that peace had to be guarded, even in places where peace once seemed guaranteed. Concrete walls, steel desk bolted to the floor, maps pinned to corkboard, shelves stacked with binders and equipment from a life I'd buried years ago. It wasn't a bunker. It wasn't a panic room. It was something in between, a place to think clearly when the world above grew loud. On the main wall hung a full topographic map of Redwater Valley. Every property boundary was hand-marked, every creek line traced in blue pencil. My ranch sprawled across the lower bowl of the valley, the dam rising near the narrow end where the hills pinched close together. A few pushpins marked the homes of neighbors I trusted. Ernest's place was one. I laid the folder of fake HOA papers on the steel table, spreading the letters out beneath the warm lamp. The crisp paper looked out of place on that metal surface, too polished, too intentional. I sat, took a breath, and let my training take over. First step, sort. Second step, isolate patterns. Third, follow the seams until they split open. I laid Ernest's goat citation next to my water hazard notice. The language was identical in structure, copied template, swapped nouns. The bylaw numbers were random strings with no legal foundation, and the signature, a looping flourish that read D. Whitmore, looked printed, not signed. Amateurs, I muttered. But amateurs don't show up, in person, with 3 men and an out-of-state vehicle. Something stronger pulled the strings. I powered up my old desktop tower. The fans spun to life, humming like distant propellers. It connected to a secured network. No Wi-Fi, no cloud, no signals for anyone to trace or interfere with. I typed the Nevada number from the letter into my lookup tools. As expected, it led to a virtual answering service, rented for $65 a month. The website domain traced to a registrar in Phoenix and then to a mailbox in, there it was again, Las Vegas. Why Vegas? I whispered. Vegas wasn't the home of HOAs. It was the home of shell companies. On the second monitor, I pulled up county public records. No HOA filings for our valley, no amendments, no board minutes, nothing. The men's story about recent updates was fiction from the first syllable. Rusty settled on the floor beside me, sighing as he laid his head on his paws. He hated basements, but wouldn't leave me alone down here, not after the morning we'd had. I clicked through property transactions from the last year. That's when I saw it. A series of purchases around the outer rim of Redwater Valley, all through the same holding company. High Range Developments, LLC. A shell. No website. No board members listed. No office. But money moved through it. Big money. And then I found something worse. 3 days before the first letter arrived, High Range filed an intent to develop notice for a planned resort and luxury subdivision, right on top of land that wasn't for sale, right on top of my land. The map showed dotted lines cutting through the valley like surgical marks on a patient who hadn't agreed to the procedure. One of those dotted lines ran straight over my dam. The plan wasn't just development, it was takeover. A hostile one. A quiet click echoed from upstairs, floorboards shifting. I froze, eyes locked on the ceiling. For a heartbeat, the house above felt huge and empty and vulnerable. Then Emma's voice floated down, faint and sweet, singing the tune she'd learned at school. I breathed again. I turned back to the monitors. My cursor hovered over High Range's listed address, It was another mailbox, this time in Bozeman. A dead end. But every shell company has a parent if you dig deep enough. I typed faster, tunneling through ownership layers, cross-referencing filings, checking corporate timelines. 40 minutes later, after peeling back the last false name, I found the root. Hale Consolidated Holdings. CEO, Preston Hale. I leaned back in my chair. I knew the name. Anyone in the valley with land did. Hale had been offering to buy property for 2 years, lowballing, pressuring, leaving business cards on mailboxes and fences. Folks who refused often found themselves dealing with sudden issues, county inspections out of nowhere, confusing legal letters, dropped property valuations. For most, it was annoyance. For some, fear. For me, it had never been more than a footnote. Until now. Now his men were at my gate asking for my daughter. I rubbed my jaw, feeling the weight of the thought settle like dust on my shoulders. Hale wanted this valley. He wanted my land. And maybe he'd finally realized the dam I controlled was the linchpin of the whole water system. Whoever owned the dam controlled the lake, the flow, and the future development. That gave me leverage. And leverage makes people desperate. I pulled a manila envelope from the bottom drawer. State water right permits, original dam inspection paperwork, environmental filings, the deed showing my property boundary cutting right across the creek. Documents older than any of Hale's companies. My weapons. Legal ones. I spread them next to the HOA letters like a battlefield layout. Proof and lies, truth and fraud. And somewhere between them sat the reason those men had looked past me and toward the house, toward Emma's boots. "Why her?" I whispered. The basement felt colder. Rusty stood suddenly, ears up. He stared at the stairwell and let out one sharp bark. Then a car engine rumbled outside. Not close, but not far either, traveling slow down the county road, tires crackling over gravel. I checked the wall monitor showing the exterior cameras. The SUV wasn't back. This was a pickup, a familiar one. Ernest's. He rolled to a stop near my fence line, hat low, shoulders hunched like the morning had aged him 5 years. He got out, holding another envelope. My stomach tightened. So it wasn't just us. I climbed the stairs, the weight of everything rising with me. Upstairs, sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows, warming the wood floors. Emma's humming drifted from her room, a fragile thread of innocence tugging at the edge of my world. I stepped onto the porch, Rusty at my heel. Ernest held out the letter with shaking fingers. "Jake," he said, voice rough. "They sent another one. This one mentions children." My pulse hit harder than any knock on the gate. "What does it say?" I asked quietly. He swallowed. "That families with minors may face inspection or removal if deemed unsafe." Wind pushed dust across the lane, carrying the words out into the open air where they no longer felt like letters on a page but a threat. Real, heavy, and aimed right where it would hurt most. I took the letter from him, the paper warm from his hands. If Hale wanted to break this valley, he'd just crossed the line that would break him instead. The words on the page swam for a moment, not because they were complicated, but because they were simple in all the worst ways. Inspection of minors. Unsecured environments. Temporary custody. All wrapped in stiff, fake legal phrasing, meant to intimidate honest folks who'd never seen a courtroom in their lives. Emma's laughter drifted faintly from her room. That sound, light, clear, innocent, clashed against every dark implication written in front of me. "They want to scare families, Jake," Ernest whispered, voice tight. "They want folks too rattled to think straight. And kids, well, that's where people break." I folded the letter slowly. "Not this time." We stood in silence a moment, Wind tugged at Ernest's coat, pushing dust in small spirals across the gravel lane. The mountains beyond the valley glowed faintly gold under the rising sun. Normally, this hour grounded me, but today, the beauty of Montana felt like a veil stretched over something rotten. "When did you get this?" I asked. "This morning. Found it stuck under the flap of my mailbox," he said. No stamp, no return address. Someone had walked right up to his property. Brazen, confident, unafraid of being seen. That told me something. They had already been watching us. Enough to know schedules, habits, children. A heaviness settled in my chest. "I'll handle it," I said softly. Ernest didn't argue. The old rancher had seen me at my worst and best. He knew the tone of a man who had decided something important. He tipped his hat, climbed back into his truck, and rumbled off down the road. I watched him go until the dust trail faded. For a moment, the valley fell completely quiet. Then a voice behind me broke the stillness. "Dad? Who was that?" Emma asked from the doorway. I turned, softening my expression. Her pajama shirt was crooked, hair tousled from sleep. She hugged a stuffed coyote to her chest. "Just Mr. Ernest, kiddo. Nothing to worry about." She nodded but didn't look convinced. Smart kid. Too smart for vague reassurances. But I brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and guided her inside. "Finish getting ready. I'll drive you to school today." She blinked. "But I like the bus." "I know," I said. "Just humor your old man today." She smiled and ran off. I stood alone again, letter in hand, the weight of the coming day tugging at me like an undertow. By the time I grabbed my keys and walked her to the truck, the sun had climbed fully over the ridge. The air was crisp, the kind that bites the lungs for the first few breaths. The engine roared to life beneath us, a familiar comfort. The drive to the school was peaceful at first. Rolling pastures, fences bending with the land, cattle grazing lazily. But as we neared the crossroads where kids gathered for the bus on most mornings, my pulse tightened. The normal crossing guard, Helen Rowe, always wore a bright orange vest and waved with a smile that showed too many teeth for 6 a.m. A retired nurse with a heart of gold. But the man standing there now wasn't Helen. He wasn't even close. He was taller, younger, with a build that said he hadn't missed a gym day in a long time. Sunglasses hid his eyes despite the weak morning light. And his vest, new, stiff, too clean, hung awkwardly on his shoulders. Most telling of all, he wasn't watching the road. He was watching the children. A cold ripple spread down my spine. Emma followed my gaze. "Dad, where's Miss Helen?" "Not sure," I murmured. "Sit tight." I drove past slowly, giving the man a long look. He pretended not to notice me, glancing down at a clipboard. But a second too late, I saw his jaw tighten. He recognized me, and I recognized him. He had been at my ranch gate. My grip on the wheel turned stiff, leather creaking under my fingers. We reached the school parking lot, and I walked Emma to her classroom door. Mrs. Lively greeted her warmly, oblivious to the heaviness hanging over the morning. Before she stepped inside, Emma paused. "Dad, am I safe at school?" The question hit harder than any threat Hale's men could make. "Yes," I said gently. "Nothing is going to happen to you. That's a promise." She hugged me tight, then disappeared into the classroom with her backpack bouncing behind her. As soon as the door shut, the mask dropped from my face. I headed straight for the sheriff's substation across the street. Sheriff McKay was pouring coffee when I walked in. The man was built like a barn beam, broad shoulders, thick mustache, eyes permanently tired from dealing with everyone's problems but his own. "Jake," he said slowly, reading my expression like a book. "What happened?" "There's a new crossing guard at the school," My voice was low, controlled. And he's not county. McKay set the coffee down with a quiet thud. Describe him. I did. The sheriff's face darkened. That's not one of ours, he muttered, and no substitute was requested. He walked to his desk, grabbed a pair of binoculars, and motioned for me to follow. We stepped outside, across to the edge of the lot. From there, we had a clear line of sight down the stretch of road to the bus stop. The man was still there, still watching the children. McKay lifted the binoculars, his mouth pressed into a thin line. That's the SUV from earlier, I said quietly, pointing to the black vehicle parked half-hidden behind a cluster of pines. Same make, same plates. Jake, that's registered to a shell company. He lowered the binoculars. One tied to property disputes in other counties. The air between us grew heavier. They're scouting, I said. Not just the land, the people. McKay exhaled slowly. I'll send a unit. Get him identified. But before he could call it in, the fake crossing guard glanced our way, stiffened, and stepped quickly toward the Moisson SUV. The vehicle started up and peeled away from the shoulder. Cowards don't stay long when real law shows up. McKay cursed under his breath and turned to me. This isn't random. They're targeting your family. I know, I said. The sheriff studied me carefully, trying to read what I wasn't saying. You're not planning something stupid, are you? He asked. Nothing illegal, I replied. He didn't look reassured. We both watched the dust cloud from the departing SUV fade down the county road. Not fast enough to wipe away the truth. They were getting bolder. And I wasn't about to wait for the next step. The sheriff headed back inside to file his report. But I stayed there on the gravel shoulder, staring at the empty stretch of road where that SUV had vanished. The cold morning wind rushed through the cottonwoods and carried the faint metallic scent of the nearby creek, my dam, my water, and apparently the next front in whatever fight Hale was preparing. I let out a long breath and walked to my truck. The leather seat groaned as I sat down, and for a brief second, I rested my forehead on the steering wheel. The valley had always been a place where a man could trust the quiet. Today, even the silence felt like it was watching. There was only one person I needed to see next. By the time the courthouse clock tower came into view, the sun had climbed higher, warming the limestone buildings and casting long shadows across the square. I parked beside a faded blue pickup with a cracked taillight. Sarah Coleman's truck. She was already inside. Sarah practiced water law, property law, and on good days, common sense, which made her one of the few attorneys in counties surrounding the valley that people trusted. She grew up ranch-side just like the rest of us and didn't have much patience for slick city developers. Inside her office, sunlight filtered through half-drawn blinds, throwing stripes across shelves of old deed books and river maps. You look like you've been dragged behind a hay wagon, Sarah said as soon as I stepped in. That bad? I asked. She crossed her arms. Worse. Sit. I laid the envelope on her desk, the one Ernest had given me that morning. She didn't touch it at first. She just looked at my face. This has to do with that fake HOA you told me about last week. It's gotten worse, I said. A lot worse. She finally picked up the letter and scanned it. Her eyebrows knitted tighter with every line. This is bold, she murmured. Fines for water hazards? Inspections of minors? Jake, this isn't fake HOA nonsense anymore. This crosses into serious territory. That's what I figured. She reached for her glasses, slid them up her nose, and opened her laptop. Let me check something. While she typed, I walked to the window. From up here, you could see the valley's mouth, the long, winding road that cut through golden fields toward the distant ridge. And beyond that ridge, the creek that fed my dam shimmered faintly in the sun. The land looked peaceful, and that peace felt fragile. Jake, Sarah said sharply. I turned. She rotated her screen toward me. This LLC, the one on your letter, it's tied to land acquisitions in 3 Montana counties. Every case involved harassment tactics, anonymous letters, fake enforcers, legal confusion, small infractions, drive people to sell cheap. She clicked a few keys, bringing up more filings. And every one of those neighborhoods had water features, ponds, runoff channels, creeks, enough water rights to influence new development. They're trying to pressure the entire valley, I said. Sarah nodded. And they're using your dam as leverage. If they can argue it violates county standards, or create doubt about ownership, they can spook every family downstream. I leaned forward on her desk. Sarah, I need to know what I actually hold. All of it. She stood, walked to a tall cabinet, and pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger labeled Water Rights, Clearview Valley, 1946 present. Jake, your grandfather filed for storage and diversion rights over the entire creek, she said, flipping through marked pages. That includes the dam you repaired 2 years ago and every spillway you maintain. You own the structure, the water distribution, the overflow, everything. Meaning Hale can't claim jurisdiction. Not legally, she said, but these guys aren't using legal channels. They're using fear. I rubbed the bridge of my nose. He sent someone to my daughter's bus stop. Sarah froze. Her expression sharpened. Tell me everything. I did. Calm, deliberate, detailed. From the fake crossing guard to the SUV, to the letters to the so-called enforcers at my gate. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. Jake, they're escalating toward personal pressure, toward leverage. Say it, I told her quietly. They're targeting your daughter. A chill ran through me, deeper than the winter wind. Sarah placed a hand on the desk, steadying herself. This is no longer about property. This is about safety. I know. You need to secure your home. I already started. Then escalate. I nodded once. Sarah began typing quickly. I'll prepare injunction papers, ownership proof, emergency filings. I'll contact the county about those fake enforcers and the bogus HOA. You gather everything, every letter, photo, recording. And Jake? I met her eyes. Don't confront them alone. Outside, the courthouse bell tolled noon, each chime echoing across the square. But the sound felt distant. I drove home under a sky streaked with high clouds blown thin by mountain winds. Dust rolled behind the truck in long plumes that reached toward the foothills. When I pulled into the ranch, I didn't go inside right away. I checked the fence posts where I'd hidden the first set of IR cameras last month. Then the porch planks, pressure mats wired into the silent alarm. Then the barn rafters where an old Navy crate held tools I hoped never to need again. Inside the house, I paused outside the reinforced closet in my office. Emma's safe place. She didn't know it was built for threats like this. She just knew it was the emergency room Dad made long ago. I whispered the code word under my breath, the one only she and I used. Starlight. The word steadied me. I walked through the kitchen, opened the back door, and stepped onto the porch. The creek was visible through the cottonwoods, water glinting in patches of sunlight. My land, my dam, my daughter. A triangle no man was going to interfere with. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Working fast. Will update. Stay alert. I pocketed the phone and scanned the property line once more. Nothing moved except the wind teasing loose strands of grass. But the stillness didn't fool me. Quiet often comes right before something breaks. I stood there until the sun dipped lower, until the air cooled, until the shadows grew long across my fields. Then I went inside, locked the door, and prepared for what I knew was coming next. Because if those men thought they could intimidate me through my daughter, they'd chosen the wrong valley. Then I went inside, locked the door, and prepared for what I knew was coming next. Because if those men thought they could intimidate me through my daughter, they'd chosen the wrong valley. Night settled slow and heavy over the ranch, the kind of darkness that absorbs sound, where every familiar noise, from the groan of cooling timber to the tick of the old wall clock, feels just a little too sharp. I walked through the house one last time, checking locks, sensors, and quiet safeguards only I knew how to build. Years of tactical work taught me something simple. Preparation is half the battle. By 10 o'clock, the valley was silent. Even the cattle had settled. I brewed a cup of weak coffee, its warmth grounding me against the crawling tension under my ribs. I sat at the kitchen table, maps and notes spread out, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only companion I allowed myself. At midnight, I sent one text to my sister. "Emma safe?" Her reply came fast. "Asleep on the sofa." "Don't do anything reckless, Jake." My fingers hovered a moment over the screen before typing. "Just protecting what's ours." The hours between midnight and 2 always feel strange, like time slows down, waiting for something to happen. And tonight, that feeling wrapped around the house like a thin fog. Outside, the moon cast pale silver over the fields, turning the frost-kissed grass into rows of glinting needles. At 2:13 a.m., the first alert lit up the monitor above my desk. A soft ping, almost too gentle for what it meant. Movement at the south fence. I leaned forward, my pulse steady but focused. A second ping followed, east fence, then a third, farther off, near the gravel road. They weren't reckless. They were coordinated. I killed the desk lamp and let my eyes adjust to the dark. The house felt different now, purposeful, braced. Dust floated in the blue-gray moonlight coming through the window, drifting like tiny flakes of ash. I moved quietly to the mudroom, opened the wooden cabinet built into the wall, and took out the hand-sized remote tied to the silent alarm system. No weapons, no confrontation, just safety triggers and recording devices. This fight was going to be won with evidence, not fists. At 2:17 a.m., the time stamped forever in my memory. The main camera feed lit up. The black Suburban, lights off, engine barely audible. It rolled slow along the ridge road, tires crushing frost and loose dirt in a quiet rhythm that somehow made the night feel colder. It stopped just beyond the cottonwoods that framed my driveway. 3 figures stepped out. They wore dark outdoor gear, nothing flashy, but enough to blend into the shadows. Their breath fogged the air. One carried a tablet. Another had a padded case. The third held a binder, the same binder they'd flashed at my gate. They whispered among themselves, but the directional microphone picked up only fragments. Child welfare. Get her quietly. Contract says leverage. First, my jaw tightened. They still believed Emma was home. I stepped into the barn, slipping into the shadows between stacked hay bales. My boots made no sound on the packed dirt floor. The familiar smell of hay and old wood steadied me. I moved through the barn until I reached the crack in the boards facing the driveway. Moonlight washed over the 3 men as they crossed the yard. The gravel barely shifted under their boots. They were trained enough to avoid being obvious, but not trained enough to avoid being predictable. The lead man gestured toward the porch. The other 2 moved to the windows, shining soft lights through cracks to scan the rooms, trying to locate a child who wasn't even there. I listened to the rhythm of their steps, slow, calculating, deliberate. Years of training taught me how to judge confidence by footfall. They were confident, too confident. At the porch, the tall one knelt beside the lock. Tyler, if the records Sarah and I pulled were correct, the tech guy. He tapped something into a small device clipped to his belt. The porch light flickered as he probed the system. He frowned. "It's older wiring," he whispered. "Give me a second." He didn't know I'd rerouted the circuits an hour earlier. I pressed the silent alarm trigger once. A tiny vibration buzzed against my palm, telling me it had armed the second layer of security. The front door clicked once, then twice. Unlocked. They moved inside with the quiet shuffle of people who had rehearsed this. My monitors blinked again. The foyer camera followed them as they scanned the living room, checking corners, probing shadows. "Kids upstairs!" The leader's voice was low, too confident, as he pointed to the staircase. He didn't know the silhouette in Emma's bed was only pillows and a weighted training dummy under her blanket. Nothing more than a decoy lit perfectly by the nightlight. I slipped out the barn's rear exit, circling toward the house. The cold bit at my jawline, the grass crunching faintly beneath me. I kept to the narrow path between the cottonwoods and the porch post lights, hugging the shadows until I reached the back door. The night was so still that even my breath felt too loud. Inside, the faint creak of the staircase sounded through the walls. One step, another. Their weight shifted, slow and cautious. My house knew their movements before I did, floor sensors registering each footfall, sending quiet signals back to the tablet in my pocket. I made it to the hallway just as they reached the top landing. From there, I could see the faint glow from Emma's room, the soft purple light shaped like a crescent moon. It cast long shadows across the walls, dancing with every movement the intruders made. One of them whispered, "She's asleep. Easy." The second whispered, "Take pictures for the report." Then the leader added, "Get the leverage. Make him fold." My hand hovered over the second, silent trigger. This one activating every hidden camera to full resolution, ensuring audio sync with the sheriff's cloud server. I pressed it. A barely audible pulse flowed through the walls. They didn't notice. I waited until the tall one reached for the doorknob, until his fingers curled around the brass, until the moment he would push the door open and find the decoy waiting. Then I stepped forward into the dim hallway light and spoke calmly. "That's close enough." The three men froze. Slowly, they turned their heads toward me. My shadow stretched across the floorboards, long and still, framed by the moonlight spilling through the window behind me. "Gentlemen," I said, keeping my voice even, steady, "you're trespassing on private property. Everything you do from this point forward is being recorded." Their eyes widened, not in fear, but in realization. Their plan had just fallen apart, and for the first time all night, the house felt like it was breathing again. The hallway felt impossibly narrow, lit only by the soft purple glow leaking from the decoy nightlight in Emma's room. Dust motes drifted lazily between us, suspended in the quiet tension. All three men stood frozen at the top of my staircase, one hand on the doorknob, one foot lifted mid-step, one breath half-drawn. The lead man swallowed. "Mr. Remy, we're conducting an authorized welfare No," I interrupted, keeping my tone flat. "You're impersonating officials, on my land, in my home." The second man shifted, his boots scraping lightly against the old pine floor. A tiny sound, almost insignificant, except I'd been waiting for it. The wood beneath them creaked. Not the usual groan of old boards, but the distinct, subtle click of weight against the pressure markers I'd built into the staircase landing years ago. They didn't know it, but they were standing in the center of the trap I'd designed for emergencies. Not violence, just containment, surprise, and documentation. "Step away from the door," I said, slowly. They didn't move. The first man, Tyler, tightened his grip on the doorknob. He looked at me, then at the decoy silhouette inside Emma's room. His face paled. "The girl's inside," he muttered to the others. "No," I said quietly. "She's not." They didn't know whether to believe me. Good. Doubt made people slow. I lifted the small remote in my hand. Last warning, I said. The leader's jaw clenched. You can't stop us. The HOA bylaws give us— There is no HOA, I said, and then I pressed the button. A soft mechanical snap echoed behind their feet as the latch under the landing released. It wasn't a dangerous drop, just enough to shift the board beneath them by an inch, enough to break their balance and make them react on instinct. They stumbled backward, right where I wanted them. In the chaos of that single second, I stepped sideways into the staircase alcove and kicked the heavy brace I'd wedged under the banister earlier. It swung upward on a pivot, blocking the narrow hallway like a wooden gate. The first man fell backward onto it, the wind rushing out of him in a surprised grunt. The second reached for the wall and slipped, his boots hitting the rug I'd deliberately laid at the top of the stairs. It slid under his weight, sending him down onto the first man in a pile of limbs and startled curses. Don't move, I warned calmly. The third man, Marcus, the muscular one, managed to stay on his feet. Barely. He steadied himself and glared at me. You think this scares us? He spat. You think this cheap farm trick changes anything? Not scared, I said. Just contained. Behind me, the camera above the hallway door clicked softly as it zoomed in to capture their faces. Perfect evidence. Precisely what I needed. Marcus straightened, puffing out his chest in a show of bravado. We're leaving with that, kid, he growled. Move aside. I didn't move. There's no child for you to take. He blinked. Don't lie. I'm not. I stepped forward, letting the thin beam of moonlight catch my eyes. She's not home. You watched a decoy for the last 5 minutes. Their heads whipped toward the open crack in Emma's door. The moonlit silhouette, a dummy under a blanket, sat perfectly still, convincingly still. You, the leader stuttered. You tricked us. I protected my daughter, I corrected. And you recorded yourselves trying to enter a child's room without permission. Sheriff McKay will love that footage. The first man scrambled against the stair brace, panic flashing through his eyes. You don't understand. We were told— Told what? I asked. To scare families? To force sales? To use children as leverage? His silence was answer enough. The house remained still, the air heavy with the scent of wood polish and night air drifting through the cracked window. Outside, a gust of wind rustled the cottonwoods, the branches scratching lightly against the siding, like fingernails tracing a warning. Time to end this. You're not leaving through the front, I said. Marcus sneered. And who's going to stop us? You? No, I replied calmly. The front door opened downstairs. Heavy footsteps crossed the entryway tile. Sheriff McKay's voice rose up the staircase. Jake, you all right? Relief edged into the leader's eyes. Too soon. McKay stepped into view, flanked by 2 deputies. Their flashlights cut white beams through the dimness. Well, the sheriff said, rubbing his jaw, this sure looks like a problem. The men deflated, all the false authority melting off them like frost under morning sun. Sheriff, I said evenly, these men entered my home without consent. They impersonated officials, and they attempted to access a miner's room. One of the deputies lifted a camera tablet. We've got live footage syncing with the server. Everything's documented. The leader sagged visibly. Marcus muttered a curse under his breath. The second man looked like he might faint. But I wasn't finished. You 3 are going to walk downstairs calmly, I said. You're going to sit on the porch until the sheriff is done, and then you're going to tell him who sent you. Every name, every instruction, every detail. The leader shook his head. We can't. You don't understand. I do, I said softly. You answered to someone named Hale. They stiffened. McKay's eyebrows shot up. Preston Hale? The developer? The leader swallowed hard. That's the one, I said. And he's the reason they're here tonight. McKay nodded, jaw tight. Then we're going to have a long conversation downstairs. As the deputies guided the men toward the staircase, each step creaked under their shifting weight. Their earlier confidence had drained away, leaving behind only the sound of shallow breathing and the subtle scrape of boots against worn wood. When the hallway finally emptied, I stepped into Emma's room. Moonlight washed over the decoy blanket. The dummy sat still, harmless, silent. I pulled the blanket back and let out a slow breath. Safe. She was safe. Downstairs, the murmur of voices drifted upward. Questions, denials, and the slow crumble of bravado under truth. I leaned against the doorframe, letting the tension bleed out of my shoulders. Tonight had been a test. Not of strength, not of force, but of resolve. And I was nowhere near finished. The front porch creaked beneath my boots as I stepped outside. Dawn hadn't broken yet, but the faintest gray hue had begun to lift the darkness off the valley. The chill in the air felt cleaner than before, sharper, as if the land itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Sheriff McKay stood beside his cruiser, arms folded, watching the three men sit hunched on the wooden steps. Their faces were drawn tight with exhaustion and fear. The faux confidence they'd carried into my home had evaporated, leaving behind the truth beneath their masks. Three men who knew they'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross. "Jake," McKay said as I approached. "They're clamming up." I nodded. "They will? For how long?" "As long as they think they still have leverage." The sheriff studied me a moment. "What are you thinking?" I exhaled slowly, the steam curling upward in the cold. "Hale sent them to break me, so we break the illusion that they hold any power here." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Within the law, Jake." "Within the law," I confirmed. "We give them a choice." McKay's eyes narrowed with interest. "Go on." "They either wait here for the FBI to arrive, which means federal kidnapping charges, or—" I looked at the gravel road stretching from my driveway toward the county station, its stones shining faintly. "They walk, under their own power, every step recorded, every word spoken voluntarily." McKay followed my gaze. "It's a long way. That's the point." He considered it. "It's unorthodox, but legal, as long as you don't compel them by force." "I won't touch them." With a slow nod, the sheriff stepped back. "They're yours for 5 minutes." I approached the porch. The three men looked up, distrustful, worn, confused. I crouched on the top step. "You're in a bad spot," I said quietly, "and we both know it." The leader, the one with the binder, swallowed hard. "You broke into a home, impersonated officials, targeted a child." I kept my voice level, calm, controlled. "You recorded yourselves doing it." The smallest of the three closed his eyes. He already knew. "If the FBI takes this case," I continued, "your lives change forever. And I mean forever." They didn't speak. "So here's your only alternative." I stood, letting the wooden board under my heel creak loudly. "You walk to the sheriff's station on your own, and you confess everything. Every order Hale gave you, every tactic you used, every family you harassed. You tell them voluntarily." I gestured toward the road. 6 blocks, that's all." Why would we do that?" the middle one stammered. "Because once you cross that property line," I said, pointing to the fence, "I won't be the one meeting you, federal agents will." The sheriff stepped forward, silent but imposing. The three men looked at each other. Their shoulders sagged. Fear flickered across their faces. Fear not of me, but of what came next if they didn't take this choice. Finally, the leader whispered, "We'll walk." I stepped aside. The first ray of dawn crept over the ridge as they rose. Their legs trembled. Their jackets were torn from the staircase fall. Dust clung to their clothes. They looked like men returning from a battle they hadn't trained for. As they stepped onto the gravel driveway, the sheriff's body cam blinked to life. My own porch cameras rotated, recording. Everything would be documented, transparently, legally. Their first steps crunched loudly in the quiet morning. The sound echoed across the valley, over the frost-covered fields and sleeping ranch houses. Porch lights flicked on up and down the lane as neighbors stirred, hearing the unusual commotion. Ernest Walker stepped out onto his front porch in his flannel robe, blinking behind his glasses. He took in the sight. 3 men walking stiffly down the gravel, McKay's cruiser following behind, me walking several yards back. "What in the world?" he murmured. "They broke into my house, Ernest," I said quietly as I passed him. "We're letting them come clean." He nodded once, slowly. "Good. Let the law take it from here." The men kept walking. Gravel bit into their souls. Their breath turned to mist in the air. But what surprised me was how quiet the valley became. As more neighbors emerged from their homes, Mr. and Mrs. Lavoie, the Baxter twins, old Carol from 2 houses down, nobody spoke loudly, nobody jeered, nobody taunted. They simply watched. A silent, collective statement. This valley protects its own. A few minutes later, the leader stumbled, catching himself on his knee. The smallest one panted heavily, his breath hitching. But they didn't stop. They knew stopping was worse. The sheriff's station came into view at the end of the street just as the sun crested the horizon, painting the sky in soft streaks of rose and gold. A peaceful morning. A new beginning. The kind the valley deserved. Halfway down the final block, the leader finally broke. "It was Hale," he said hoarsely. "Preston Hale, the developer." The sheriff leaned out his window. "Keep talking," he said. "Everything you say is being recorded." The man continued, voice cracking by the second. He hired us. Told us to pose as an HOA. Said families would fold under pressure. Said the girl." His voice trailed off. My jaw tightened. The smallest one spoke next, choking out the words. "We didn't mean for it to go that far. He said it was just to scare folks into selling. That you'd break if your kid was involved. We didn't know," I cut him off gently. "You knew enough." They reached the station steps at last. Their exhaustion showed in every line of their posture. But they didn't hesitate. They walked inside voluntarily, as required by law, and surrendered. Sheriff McKay turned to me. "You played that clean," he said. "Very clean." "I told you," I said. "No force, just truth." But as the morning breeze carried dust across the street, and the first birds began their early chatter, I felt no triumph, only a chilling question that gnawed at me. If Hale had been willing to send men into my home, what was his true endgame? The sun had barely crested the ridge when Sheriff McKay motioned me inside the station. The 3 men were already separated into interview rooms, 3 doors, 3 guilty consciences trapped behind thin walls. "Jake," McKay said, shutting the office door behind us, "you need to hear this." He tapped a key on his computer. A video feed flickered to life. The leader, face pale, hands trembling, sat across from Deputy Alvarez. His voice wavered as he spoke. "He said the valley was holding up the deal," the man muttered. "Said he couldn't close the contracts without lowering the sale prices first." "Who?" Alvarez asked. The man exhaled shakily. "Preston Hale." Hearing the name out loud made the office feel colder. as if the temperature dropped a few degrees. The developer, the man who'd been sniffing around Montana land for years, the one everyone said built resorts by pushing folks out, not buying them out. The man who wanted my dam. I leaned forward, eyes locked on the screen. The enforcer continued, his voice cracking. He told us how to do it. Said people break faster when children are involved. Told us you were the keystone, the dam owner, he said bitterly. Said if we cracked you, the whole valley would fold. My stomach tightened. McKay paused the video. Jake, this is bigger than intimidation. Hale had a strategy, a plan. What plan? I asked. The sheriff clicked again. A second video began. The smaller man, Tyler, sitting with his hands wrapped around a cup of water. Hale's got investors lined up, Tyler whispered. Out-of-state money. They want lake access. Your lake access. He can't get development permits unless he controls the creek system. And he can't control the creek system while you own the dam. I stared at the screen, the world narrowing to a thin, sharp point. He needed the water, I murmured. He needed everything, McKay replied. Land, rights, quiet compliance. I swallowed slowly. So the fake HOA was just theater. Leverage, McKay corrected. A way to scare families into selling. A sick, cold anger settled under my ribs. Not fiery, not loud. The kind that builds slowly, like water pressure behind stone. The sheriff walked to a metal drawer and pulled out a thick folder. You need to see this too. Came in from the county clerk this morning. He slid it toward me. My name was scrawled on top. I opened it. Inside were maps. Detailed, color-coded, precise. Development plans stamped with Hale's company letterhead. Roads, cabins, a resort lodge, boat ramps, and all of it cut straight through the valley. Straight through my dam. Straight through my daughter's future. He filed these 6 weeks ago, McKay said, pending approval. He planned to take it all, I whispered. Silence settled heavy between us. Then the sheriff opened another folder, this one thinner, but more dangerous. Financials, he said. Wire transfers, asset movements, contracts with those LLCs your attorney flagged. And these were found, where? I asked. In the back of Hale's SUV, McKay replied. Someone left it behind when they panicked. He pushed the folder closer. This is more than a land grab, Jake. It's conspiracy, fraud, interstate manipulation. And the attempted kidnapping? McKay nodded grimly. That's the nail in his coffin. I stood, pacing slowly to the window. Outside, the valley stretched wide and golden under the rising sun. The cottonwoods shimmered. The water from my dam sparkled as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. He had targeted my home, my land, my daughter. And now, the fight was crystal clear. I turned back to McKay. What happens next? First, he said, Sarah Coleman is filing an emergency injunction with the district court. That'll freeze Hale's assets and any development plans tied to the fake HOA. I took a steady breath. Good. Second, he said, I'm issuing a warrant for Hale's arrest. The sheriff grabbed his hat and walked toward the door. But Jake, this next part? It's going to get messy. He's got lawyers, money, influence. I followed behind him, my boots echoing faintly on the station floor. He also made one mistake, I said quietly. McKay paused. What's that? He underestimated a father. We stepped outside. The morning sun had climbed higher now, bathing the valley in soft gold. A calm scene, a deceptive one. In the distance, I saw Sarah's old pickup pull into my driveway. She climbed out holding 3 binders, thick, heavy, and full of the truth. Evidence, deeds, water rights, everything I'd inherited, everything Hale wanted. She lifted a hand when she saw me approach. "Jake," she said, her voice steady and fierce. "We've got him. Everything he's done is here. Signed, dated, irrefutable." I opened the top binder. Inside was a deed chart proving my family's ownership of the entire creek flow, from the ridge headwaters to the spillway below the dam. "He can't touch this," Sarah said. "Not legally. Not with any trick in the book." A quiet strength filled me. Not anger. Not vengeance. Certainty. The valley belonged to the people who lived on it, worked it, protected it. Not to a developer hiding behind shell companies. I looked out across the land, fields rolling like a quiet sea, horses grazing lazily near the fence line, the dam glinting under the morning light. This place wasn't just property. It was heritage, memory, legacy, and I would defend it with everything the law allowed. As Sarah packed her files again, a deputy hurried toward us. "Sheriff," he called out, "we just got confirmation. Hale left his office 30 minutes ago, headed east." McKay frowned. "Running?" The deputy nodded. "Looks that way." The sheriff sighed. "All right, let's get the state, troopers on it." But I already knew how this story was going to end. Because men like Hale always believed they could outrun consequences. But not in this valley. Not after what he'd done. By mid-afternoon, the sky had shifted into that warm Montana gold, the kind that settles gently over the fields and lays a soft glow on the fences, the creek, and the old cottonwoods. But the valley wasn't calm. Not today. Not with the news spreading like wildfire. Preston Hale was on the run. I drove back to the ranch with Sarah's binders beside me on the passenger seat, their weight a steady reminder of what this fight had cost, and what it had protected. When I pulled into the driveway, neighbors were already gathering outside Ernest Walker's home. Word had traveled fast. Faster than Hale's SUV ever could. Ernest stepped forward, leaning heavily on his cane. "Jake," he said, eyes softening. "We heard." "Seems Hale didn't stick around to face the music," I replied. "He never does," Ernest muttered. "Men like him build fortunes on running, but they don't get far." Behind him, a handful of families stood silently, parents holding their kids a little tighter, ranchers with their hats in their hands, older couples who'd lived here longer than I'd been alive. Their faces held fear, yes, but also something stronger. Relief. Trust. Defiance. One by one, they placed letters, photos, and recorded voicemails on Ernest's picnic table. Evidence, everything they'd received from the fake HOA. The pile grew into a small mountain of paper. "We gathered it all," Mrs. Lavoie said. "Sheriff said it'll help with the case." I nodded. "It will." Sarah's pickup rolled up moments later, dust swirling behind it. She stepped out holding her final binder, a navy blue one marked with a single silver sticker, the county seal. "Emergency injunction is signed," she said, handing it to me. "Judge Ramirez put a freeze on every asset Hale touched, every LLC he hid behind, every permit he filed." "And the dam?" I asked. She smiled. "Untouchable. Permanently recognized as yours." I opened the binder. Inside lay a crisp, newly issued document. Water System Ownership Confirmation. Remy Family Estate. My grandfather's signature from 1946 was stamped beside the county's embossed seal. Everything Hale had tried to steal was now written in law, in ink no fake HOA could ever mimic. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up next. McKay stepped out with a grim set to his jaw, but for the first time in days, there was a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "State troopers caught him," he said, 15 miles from the Idaho line, tried to switch plates on his SUV behind a gas station. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Hale is in custody, McKay continued, charged with conspiracy, fraud, interstate harassment, and attempted child endangerment. The judge denied bail. Silence stretched across the yard. Then a long, collective exhale. Kids hugged their parents. Dogs barked somewhere down the road. Even the wind seemed to shift, carrying away the last shadow Hale had cast on our valley. But the sheriff wasn't done. He motioned to the deputy behind him, who opened the cruiser's trunk and lifted out a plastic evidence box. Inside lay Hale's development plans, his blueprints, his printed emails, his forged documents. "We'll present these during the hearing," McKay said, "along with the footage from your house." The footage, the audio, the decoy, the confession. Everything had come together like a cracked puzzle finally revealing its picture. And that picture was justice. "Judge Ramirez wants you present tomorrow morning," the sheriff added. "And Sarah, too." Sarah nodded. "We'll be there." The crowd dispersed slowly, families heading back to their homes, the valley soft, eaned again, as if exhaling the fear it had been holding for weeks. I walked down the trail behind my house, toward the dam, needing a moment alone. The creek reflected the late afternoon light, rippling gently against the stone wall I'd rebuilt with my own hands. Water trickled over the spillway in a soft, steady song. The same tune I'd grown up hearing, the same water Emma would grow up beside. I sat on the large flat rock near the edge, letting the cool air settle against my skin. For the first time since this began, the land felt untouched again. Honest, whole. Footsteps crunched behind me, soft ones. I didn't need to turn. "Guess you found your thinking rock," Sarah said quietly. I smiled. "Always did." She joined me, sitting a careful distance away. The two of us looked out across the water, watching it glint beneath the fading sun. "He almost took this from you," she said. "No," I replied. "He tried, but this valley doesn't bend that easily." Sarah breathed deep, letting the cool scent of wet stone and pine settle around us. "You know," she said softly, "everyone's talking about forming a neighborhood association. Not an HOA, just a circle of folks who look out for one another. Ernest wants to nominate McKay as president." I chuckled. "Bet he'll decline." "Probably," she laughed. "But the sentiment matters." The creek continued whispering below us. "There's one more thing," Sarah added, lowering her voice. "Judge Ramirez is ordering Hale's seized lots to be repurposed. The county council proposed a community project." She hesitated. "They want you to name it." I raised an eyebrow. "Me? You're the one who stood between this valley and a man who believed we were weak. They want something that honors what you protected." I looked back at the water, watching it slip over the stones that had stood strong for decades. Water remembers everything it touches. Land remembers every fight fought on it. "I'll think on it," I said quietly. As we walked back toward the ranch, the sky above us deepened into shades of amber and violet. Porch lights flicked on one by one across the valley, homes settling in for the night. And just as we reached the gate, I saw a passant, small stone sitting on top of the fence post. A familiar one, pink, with glitter embedded in it. Emma's rock. My sister must have driven by earlier, leaving it there like a message. "Guard what's yours." I picked it up, brushing dust off its surface. The valley behind us stretched wide and peaceful, framed by rugged mountains and the shimmering thread of the creek. Tomorrow, Judge Ramirez would hand down the final ruling. Hale would face the consequences he'd tried to outrun. But tonight? Tonight the valley remembered who it belonged to, and so did I. If this story hit close to home, Drop a simple justice in the comments, so I know you're out there standing your ground too. Out here, we learn that protecting what's ours isn't about force. It's about courage, community, and never letting anyone take your peace. And if you want more true-to-life HOA and ranch justice stories like this one, feel free to subscribe. I'd be glad to have you riding along.